This is a test of Mr. Collins doing a presentation. Microphone is at the regular length. This is a test moving the microphone towards me. This is a test moving the microphone away from me. This is a test letting it dangle just loosely. This is a test. Okay, everybody, this is your second lecture. This is the first of 2 lectures I want you to listen to over the weekend and take notes on. And go ahead and open your notebook to the big timeline, the one that looks like a J, that is not completely filled out yet or should not be completely filled out yet. And I'm going to recap a few things from the last lecture. I'm sorry that the video was so poor. We'll try to work from there and make it better. So we talked about Solomon and his sins, or you read about Solomon and his sins, and why, according to the biblical authors, the kingdom split in 931. The kingdom in the north is Israel. The kingdom in the south is Judah. In the north, Jeroboam, the first king, builds golden calves at Bethel and Dan as alternate places of worship. And in general, the authors of the Bible feel that the north is bad. They don't follow the family of David, and they have awful people like Ahab and Jezebel. Historically, the northern kingdom was destroyed by the Assyrian Empire in 721 BC. You do not need to know any of these dates. The Assyrians came in, they conquered the north, they sent many of the people off into exile into other parts of the Assyrian Empire, and then brought in foreigners who adopted the Israelite religion, intermarried with the Israelites who were behind, and these people became the Samaritans. That's a vocab word you're going to have to know. The Jews didn't like the Samaritans. They felt they were fakos, wannabes, and the Samaritans in turn hated the people of the south, the people of Judah. The south in general is perceived to be much more faithful to God. They've got better kings. I had you read the story of King Hezekiah and his prophet Isaiah. Hezekiah was king when the Assyrians invaded several years after they conquered the north, and Hezekiah survived that siege. There's actually some archaeological evidence, this is not testable, that Hezekiah constructed a water tunnel to bring water into the city, and that probably helped Jerusalem survive the siege. But the author of the Bible is concerned with Hezekiah's faithfulness to God, his obedience to the prophet, and that is why he survived the Assyrian attack. The Babylonians came in after the Assyrian Empire and took over, and the Babylonians were the ones who conquered the south. I've got Egypt down in the bottom there, and Egypt was involved in Israel and Judah's history for most of this period. Sometimes the people of Judah or people of Israel would ally with Egypt. Sometimes they would ally with Assyria or Babylonia. They were kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. If they sided with the Egyptians, then the Assyrians would attack them. If they sided with the Babylonians, then the Egyptians would attack them. So just know that Egypt is kind of constantly on the wings here. Obviously, from earlier in the class, Egypt is where the Israelites were taken into slavery, and Moses led them out of Egypt. Ignore that date. That's actually Josiah's reforms. Josiah will be one of the in-class readings next class period. In 587, King Nebuchadnezzar's armies come in and destroy Jerusalem and burn it to the ground. And I am really oversimplifying some history here because there were actually 2 different conquests of Jerusalem, a lot of political maneuvering, but for our intents and purposes, this is the date I'm going to stick with. 587 is when the Babylonians destroyed the temple. It's when they took the people of Judah off into exile in the same way that the Assyrians would send people into exile. The other vocab word that I put on the overhead last time was diaspora, and this refers to the movement outside of the Promised Land by the Jewish people. The Assyrians deported people, the Babylonians deported people, some of the people of Judah took refuge in Judah, and a very important event begins to take place at this point in Jewish history. They actually go through some changes theologically because of this displacement. So I'm going to ask you to turn your notebook to a brand new page, because I want to talk about the exile and the effect it had on the Jews. The Jews did come back from exile after the Persian Empire took over, and I will resume with the Persians in just a little bit. But go ahead, turn to a brand new page and leave it blank so you can fill it up with a lot of information. So let me click on Babylon, and that should shift me to the exile. We can talk about pre-exilic Judaism and post-exilic Judaism, what the Jewish religion was like before they were taken into exile by Babylon, and how the exile fundamentally changed their religion. So pre-exilic Judaism, they focused on worshiping in the temple, offering sacrifices and following the rituals of the Holocaust. The people who were important for temple worship were obviously the priests, the Levites, those who were trained in how to offer the correct sacrifices and who were from the priestly families that were assigned this public worship duty. And so for the Israelites, that was their world. When they went into exile, as I hinted at already, the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. And when the Jews were living in exile, they no longer had a temple. There was, please don't write this down, there was a small temple they had in Egypt on the island of Elephantine. But for our purposes, there is no temple. And so if there's no temple, then there's no place to worship God and to offer holocausts. So in post-exilic Judaism, and it's kind of a hybrid for a while, but during the exile and after the exile, a new place of worship emerges, a synagogue. It's not a place with an altar. It's not a place where you sacrifice animals. It is a place where you go and listen to the readings, you sing the psalms, and you pray as a community. Because the synagogue was not a place of offering holocausts, what became important to the Jews in exile was following the Torah, following the 5 books of Moses, following the law. As people in a foreign land, they were different from the Babylonians because they didn't work on Saturday. They were different from the Babylonians because they followed these kosher laws. They were different from the Babylonians because they followed all the rituals about leprosy and ritual washing and purity. So without Holocaust in exile, the Torah becomes their religious outlet. And a new type of leader emerges during this time as well, and that's what's called the scribe. And the scribes were educated people who could read and write, hence the name scribe. And in exile, Jewish leaders who could read and write became the people that were turned to for guidance on how to interpret the kosher laws and the Sabbath laws and everything else. So the priests, with their knowledge of how to offer holocausts and their bloodlines, lost some of their prestige in exile, and educated people became more important. Eventually, the scribes evolve into what we would call the rabbis of today, the people who study the law and interpret the law for the community. And really, if you look at the post-exilic Judaism piece, this is what Judaism is today, that Jews today do not offer holocausts in a temple. The Levitical priesthood is not important, but that post-exilic Judaism, in a way, is born out of the exile. Before the exile, the Jewish people, or the Israelites, focused on how God was present in the temple. The Ark of the Covenant was kept in the temple. That was the holy place, and that was seen as God's home. Before the exile, there was more of an emphasis on, Yahweh is our God, and Yahweh is on our side. And so it legitimized for the Israelites the ban and destroying the Canaanites because they worshiped the wrong God, and Yahweh was on our side, and it was okay to go out and kill these people in the name of God. And this actually fits in well with the idea of monolatry, the idea that Yahweh is our God, and we worship Yahweh, and our God is better than your God. This also is what we would call, in religious terms, nationalism. The idea that God only loves our people. God loves us Christians and God hates the Muslims. Or God, loves Muslims and hates Christians. Or God loves us Israelites and hates the Canaanites. And that's an important concept, this idea that God is on our side. And you can understand if you localize God in one place, and if you focus on God being your God, then the idea of going out and killing in the name of God, it would seem justifiable to you. When the Jews move into exile, they bring their religion with them, which is an amazing change in perception. That I told you a long time ago that in the ancient world, if you moved, you would change religions. And when the Jews went into exile, they, if you will, brought God with them. Ezekiel was the prophet who was really important in helping the Israelites realize that God was with them in exile. And that God didn't just live in the temple. The temple was destroyed, but God was still with them. And once you take that step of realizing that God doesn't just live in one place, then your brain can go to the next level and see that God then is everybody's God. There isn't the God of the Canaanites or the Philistines or the Midianites. That the God that we worship, Yahweh, is everyone's God, which is where the idea of monotheism first is really clearly articulated in the Bible. It's in 2nd Isaiah, written during the exile, that there is no God but I. There is only our God. And it's not just that Yahweh is our God and Yahweh loves us, but Yahweh is the only God. And the corollary to that is, if our God is the only God, then God must love other people too. That our God loves the Canaanites, our God loves the Philistines, our God loves the Midianites and the Amalekites and the Amorites. And this is a jump which some people even today still don't make, that God loves us Christians, and yes, God loves Muslims, and yes, God loves Hindus, and yes, God loves atheists, God loves everybody, because there is only one God. So if you're a person who's trapped in the idea that our God only likes our group, God only loves Catholics, or God only loves Americans, then you've kind of got this more primitive nature understanding of God. Excuse me. And once you realize that there is only one God, then you move to real monotheism, in which God loves everyone, and if God loves everyone, then we should love everyone as well. Okay, so go ahead and go back. Hopefully there's still some room at the bottom of this page, because I'm going to add a few more notes a little bit later on. But go ahead and go back to your timeline, and I'll fill out a few things, and then you can take a break, go run around the yard, and then come back and watch the other 15-minute video. Okay, so I'll build the timeline. The Assyrians and Babylonians ran their empire by deporting people and sending people off into exile as a way to control them and prevent rebellion. And the next empire that emerges after Babylon is the Persian Empire. And Cyrus of Persia has a completely different way of running his empire. Cyrus lets the Jews return from exile and tells them to rebuild their temple, tells them to rebuild their homeland, tells them to reestablish their identity as Jews. And to the Jews who were in exile in Babylon, wondering if God had abandoned them, the idea that the emperor was going to let them go back home and rebuild was absolutely amazing. There's a psalm that says, "We thought we were dreaming when we entered back into Zion." So in 538, again, there's no dates on the next test. In 538, Cyrus of Persia allows the Jews to return from exile and rebuild their culture and their religion. And this was actually a much more effective way of running an empire than just conquering people and deporting them. Okay, so take a break and watch the other video.